motto. Okay. All right. So I feel so stupid because
I
it's so
know,
far away.
It is so weird, isn't it? But just don't. I don't know. Do you just like pretend it's not there or talk
I
to
like
it?
to look at myself. Okay. Welcome to Faith Forward. I'm Carolyn.
And I'm Faith.
And I'm Evan.
We're here with open minds.
An open heart.
Today we have Evan with us. He came all the way from Astoria, New York, and he's going to tell us a little bit about his spiritual start in life. And then we're going to go forward with some questions that Faith has prepared and just go from there, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Evan, would you be so kind as to tell us how you started your faith journey
Sure.
from the beginning?
So, well, actually, the beginning is actually more interesting. So actually, when I was really little, we lived in an apartment complex in New London, Connecticut, and my Catholic family decided it would be a good idea to send me to Bethel because it was close by and they worked full
Do
time.
you know that?
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I know where it is. And-
So my first foray into spirituality was Judaism until I was probably 4 or 5. So I would go there every week, and like during the day when my parents had to go to work, because they had a daycare center there.
Okay.
And then like on Fridays, like I was kind of just brought up with that background, and then my parents decided to send me to catechism like around first grade. And I would come home and be like, they don't have challah bread. What is happening?
Yeah,
like, they don't have all the good stuff. And then I was mortified because I was like, oh, Mom, they're making me drink the blood of a dead man. This is terrifying.
Wow. Yeah.
So I was
I
kind of,
never knew you were Jewish at one point.
apparently I am.
Love that.
And then we did genetics. And that's fun because I'm actually Mizrahi, which is a branch of Judaism.
Okay.
So I'm like, I could convert if I
You
wanted
can do
to.
whatever you want. Yeah, you're
Um,
good to go.
But just like New London, there's a really big Jewish population there. So I always loved all the old stories from the Old Testament. It's like I love storytelling. It's a huge part of who I am, what I love. So I loved they did that like every day they had story time for us as kids. Then I went to catechism. Catechism was boring to me, but we endured it. And then I was Catholic for probably until I was about 13.
Did you get confirmed?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah, got confirmed.
Baptized. Yeah.
Confirmed.
Okay.
I still have my my confirmation card. My
What
baptism
name
card.
did you choose?
My baptism name was So Michael is my middle name. So I was like, oh, I want another archangel. Like, let's power up. So
Yeah.
I have Gabriel as my other archangel name. So air and fire.
I love that you were already thinking that.
Oh, so I think that's the
age.
thing. Is like
Yeah.
at that age, I was already kind of like mystically inclined because there's a lot of stuff that I actually love about Catholicism because I would consider myself a magician now. We'll get to that. But,
Yes.
I was always really interested in mysticism, and so I think there's a lot of really interesting mystical elements in Catholicism. So that the ideas of like the archangels being tied to different elements and having sort of different operations that they do was really fascinating to me as a kid. I was always really into fantasy, so I think that sort of the high fantasy kind of brought me into that realm. And I enjoyed Catholicism. However, not to get too dark, like as I started realizing my own sexuality, I became less and less comfortable with the priest. And there was luckily nothing happened, but there were some like things that he said to me that were a little bit suggestive of that at that age made me super uncomfortable. And I told my mom, and we stopped going.
Okay. So your mom heard you. She listened.
Oh yeah, like I'm really super lucky. Like my family is very supportive. Always been. There were other gay people in my family. So it wasn't. I was very lucky. I did not have any issues with that. But when I told my mom about it, she was like, "Yeah, we're not going there anymore." And then I think they went to other churches, and I'm not gonna say who it was. I don't want to drag anybody through.
No, we don't say
That's
church names here.
Yeah, that's not cool. But my parents tried to go to some other churches. I think my dad actually still might kind of like secretly go to church on Sundays. I wouldn't put it past him.
Secretly goes to church.
But I think that after that, two of them, my sister was like vehemently against going to church at all. Like you have to kick her, drag her. But I actually enjoyed the spirituality of it. I enjoyed the rituals in Catholicism. I really liked the storytelling aspects from the New Testament, and I always thought that they were really cool. I just, less and less felt comfortable, practicing with people who I felt like didn't accept me, and I didn't feel safe, so I left. And then, of course, like as a lot of other people who are into magical traditions, they try Wicca first because they think that's going to be cool. So I tried Wicca, and I was sort of getting into the idea of witchcraft. But I didn't really feel comfortable there because, surprise, misogyny and homophobia exists everywhere in every tradition. I know, surprise, surprise. And it didn't really feel right to me. I didn't really. It kind of felt like it was the reflexive option to Catholicism, where it also didn't really feel like it had a balance for me. I didn't feel like I belonged there. And then I kind of just stopped.
So time out.
Yeah.
When you hit the Wiccan phase, was that when we were in high school?
Yeah, I would say probably like after like late middle school, early high school.
So to tell our viewers, Evan and I went to high school together, and we were besties. And you were one of the first people. You were the first person to. I remember when we were seniors, we would celebrate the full moon, and we would wear all white, and we would call it holiday.
Yeah.
And you like dabbled in paganism or Wiccan, and I still to this day don't really know the difference between the two. But we did. I know you taught me about crystals and the powers that they had. I noticed you're wearing a crystal today. That's why I asked where you were, because I know that most of our friends growing up were, and most of our town is Catholic. So our other friends were confirmed as well. I was not, but I watched everybody else get confirmed.
Yeah, I think what drew me to Wicca and paganism is I have a deep love of nature, and I always felt like, if you want to call it God, I felt like where I felt the most connection was when I was in natural places, like if I was in the woods, or when you knew I would always be outside. I was outside for hours every day. So it was going to the woods, or going to the beach, or being in the ocean, or going hiking. I just felt like a deep connection with the world, and so that felt like a natural projection, because a lot of witchcraft and paganism has a deep reverence for the
cycles of the world, right?
Right, and sort of, and I think that one of the benefits of those faiths are reestablishing we are part of that world, and so we're so used to living outside of it in our everyday lives that we forget that we are animals that are part of the world that we live in, and I feel like the more connected we are to it, I felt healthier. I felt better.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you, you mentioned that you felt like Wicca was just kind of an opposite pole of Catholicism in some ways. I want you to elaborate a little bit on that. Like, where did you see that?
Yeah, so a lot of this has evolved since I practiced Wicca, but there was whereas I feel like in Catholicism there was an emphasis on the male priest. In Wicca, there's an emphasis on the female priestess, who's the head of the ceremonies. And typically, a lot of that faith involves the duality between the high priestess and then the high priest. And there's usually some sort of like sexual connection between the two. Not literally like physical, but like there's the idea that the god and the goddess have a relation. There was no mythology in there for someone like me who I don't want to enter into a sexual union with a woman.
That makes sense. Sure.
And as a gay man, like I would, if I aspired to become a priest, the option just didn't seem very present to me. Also, there weren't really many people around here that practiced Wicca. I didn't have any good teachers. I was really just looking from books, and so I just think that my experience was sort of hollow.
Isn't it Wicca typically there's a lot of solo practitioners too,
so
right?
Many, sure.
So were you trying to find a community to be a part of, and you didn't find that, or like?
I think that now, yeah, I would say I'm a solo practitioner, but I do work with other people. But I think that had I had a community, I think that who knows what would have happened. But I think the other thing though too is that with Wicca, I think that I went to school and was very academic minded. I am definitely somebody who likes to reference source material.
Obviously, from our conversations online.
Yeah, I kind of sort of also realized like Wicca really wasn't invented. I mean, all faiths are invented through practice, but it was invented by Gardner, who basically kind of pulled together a lot of Celtic faith from like the old Celtic, Welsh, and Pictish traditions.
What's his first name again? It's like something.
Gerald, I think
Gerald
it's Gerald
Gardner.
or I
And
might
this
be
was
wrong.
like at the turn of the 20th century, like the early 1900s.
Yeah,
right?
and a lot of the stuff was sort of borrowed from other magical and occult orders like the Golden Dawn, which would turn the century. There was a couple of different famous people involved in the Golden Dawn,
like Annie Besant,
Aleister Crowley, Mathers.
Oh, I'm not familiar with that name, so.
Yep, Arthur Waite, who
who did the tarot cards, right?
along with Pamela Coleman Smith.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of that was sort of like borrowed from the Western esoteric tradition, then it sort of became like more nature based. But the thing is, like the idea of the European, goddess and god duality exists in a lot of different European and Indo-European traditions.
Pagan traditions.
Pagan traditions, even as far down into Pakistan and northern India, like these traditions have existed. So a lot of overlap between their mythologies as well, because they had a parent culture like several thousand years ago. So when I kind of realized it was like, this isn't it. Like, this isn't really a tradition that goes all the way down to the bone. As I was kind of before, so I just kind of was like, well, this is just another thing that feels hollow to me. Like it just doesn't jive with me. I think what it's evolved into now is really cool. And I know a lot of people who practice Wicca, and I think that's really cool. I also want to make a distinction between traditional witchcraft, which is not a formal religion. It tends to be more nature-based, and it doesn't necessarily have to tether to any idea of like a god or a deity or goddess. You can if you want to, but traditional witchcraft is much different.
Would you consider that version of witchcraft the kind that Christians are terrified of?
I think anything that the Christians are terrified has been kind of
just labeled that, whether it is or not.
I think it's just they take their fears and they project them onto some other. Happen to be
something I wanted to say too, because you,
Gerald,
because you're asking him if he had a community back then, and when we were like, I don't know, 16, 18, whenever we were doing this, like Facebook wasn't invented.
Yeah,
MySpace
wasn't there.
It really wasn't the same as it is now. So like now when you look at like, oh, I want to learn about Wicca, and here's a group, and here's this, and we can find in meetups. It wasn't like that.
So much.
You had to know. You had to know where to look.
I know that is such a
people forget that. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. I mean, I can't imagine trying to learn about these things before the age of the internet.
And
so.
That's why I thought it was so interesting. I was like, how do you know this stuff?
Yeah.
The amount of information about the occult though is so immense because it like the mystical aspects of traditions, there are a myriad of them. There's so many, and there are Christian mystical traditions. There's Jewish mystical traditions. There's definitely within Islam. We have like Sufi and all that, and it's in and then you have all these other original pagan traditions across Europe and many other parts of the world, indigenous traditions. So there's so much online that one can get lost and very easily confused. To typical people, it's hard for me to even explain this stuff because to like an audience that doesn't really know a lot about that stuff, it is hard for most people from a Christian lens to distinguish. Well, what is the difference between Wicca and traditional witchcraft?
I'm still trying to decipher the difference between the Christian. I mean, I came from one Christian background to a new Christian. Well, I started with my friends in Catholicism, and then I had my extended family who were Baptists, and then I upgraded to evangelicals, which was a mess. and now I'm in the United Church of Christ, which is much more progressive, but
Like, is
still,
it like Unitarian.
sort of. They're not really, but
It's sort of like it's still within a like Unitarian kind of expands into all traditions.
like a
tries to hold
Methodist
it, and,
almost.
and I feel like United Church of Christ is still very Christian. It is Christian.
It is, but we
So-
don't have like a leader. Like we don't have like the Pope or whatever. But even switching from we've talked about this in the past. Even the vocabulary is different. You know, it's I didn't think it would be such a different shift. And I'm like, okay, you believe in God, you believe Jesus died on the cross. Okay, cool. Like we're on the same page. And they're like, ooh. I mean, they do believe that, but there's so much more, and there's so many more permissions that the other faith tradition didn't allow, and so
Yeah, so I think it gets back to what
Yeah.
Evan's talking about, where like a lot of these different religions, whether it's Christianity or witchcraft or Islam or all these, they have like a core of mystical tradition that's kind of embedded inside of them. And then the expression of that kind of
It
morphs
tweaks
into
as it
all
goes
sorts of
further
different
out,
things.
yeah.
So
And then you get, in many traditions, like you're describing, you get dogma, which is something that I go back and forth about, because I think a lot of the reasons why I left a lot of those more traditional forms was because of the dogma, because it just didn't reflect the values of my life, and it didn't make sense to me. Like an example, like we'll go back and we'll look at some of the rules from the Old Testament, right? Why in this day and age can't we wear a polyblend shirt?
Yeah.
Well, back then, when you consider what they needed to do, they were a tribe trying to survive. And, people have allergies to certain fibers. And so if you're trying to make sure that you know what it is and you're trying to keep your people alive, maybe wearing a tri-blend isn't a good idea because you won't necessarily know what's in it.
Yeah.
Same thing with shellfish. Shellfish carries bacteria. So maybe the reason why they wanted to keep that kosher, keep it clean, is because they didn't want people to die.
Right.
And, we'll get even more graphic if that's okay. I don't
go
know.
crazy.
Yeah.
No limits.
Anal sex, right? We know,
Right in.
we know that is a really easy way to transmit infection
Yeah.
because the anal lining is so thin. And maybe they didn't have as robust sexual education that we have now, and we know that. But you observe tribe. Okay, these two guys are having a great time, but why are they getting sick? So it must be God. God must there must be something sinful about that. That's my assumption. I'm taking a scientific lens and anthropology lens and putting it back in past history. That made sense for that time. We're trying to keep people well and healthy and
With
safe.
limited information as far as how the world of health works and science and all of that.
So now we know better as a culture and humanity, and so I think that a lot of the dogma that has remained in a lot of these faith traditions don't work for us. They don't work for me. I don't think they work for a lot of people. And I also think that they get in the way of really being connected to spirituality.
I agree.
Yeah, it's really like a two-edged sword, because in a lot of ways it is a good introduction to spirituality, and it gives you a vocabulary with which to work and be able to identify the spiritual elements as you encounter them. But it just the downside to it is it becomes crystallized, and people start to think of that crystallization as the actual substance of the divine, and it is not.
Really well put, yeah.
Yeah, and so that's where we start to run into problems. People start to defend that crystallization, and then the essence of love is gone. Poof.
Yeah, the human connection,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is a really big part of belonging to any tradition, is you want to have that community with people and feel connected to them, and I feel like it just gets lost in the sauce. So
So that was a struggle that you had, trying. You're like,
Yeah.
this isn't working. Like the dogma is getting in the way here. But you saw a benefit to. Did you see a benefit to it at all? Ever? Was it always kind of like, this just is not working for me? Like any part? You said you liked the ritual of the Catholic Church.
I love ritual, period.
Uh-huh.
I went on.
What's the benefit of that for you?
So I sort of think that I've come to understand that our bodies are one aspect of understanding who we are, but I think that we exist on multiple, levels. We have a dense body, and then we have more subtle things going on, right? We have all these chemical processes happening and all this stuff, and so I think that when ritual sort of helps to break you out of the kind of prison of the idea of I'm just this body here.
Okay.
So getting to the ritual sort of is what like I would call like ecstasis. So you're going out of body.
Okay.
And for me, a lot of sort of altered states of consciousness, you could certainly use drugs to get there, but I think the healthier way to do that is through ritual. So the importance of ritual for me is to sort of get you into the headspace that you need to get to either, depending on what you're trying to do. If you're into theurgy and you want to touch, reach out to the deity that you work with, or in Tantra they call them a like a guiding Buddha. You reach out to them, and so it requires kind of a ritual to alter, the mundane thinking that we get stuck in every day. You got to kind of step outside that. So for me, I've always loved that. I loved the pageantry of it, costumes. I mean, I studied
Yeah.
theater, so theater really, as the Western entertainment came out of ritual. It came out of, the Greek and the pagan tradition. It evolved over time to become more elaborate. But I love all of that. I love that vehicle of, they call it in Greek catharsis. It's that moment where you have like that out of body experience where you feel some sort of completion with your emotions. You're connecting to what's happening. So I kind of got, after the Wicca, I got into more new agey stuff, I would say. I really kind of explored like new age. Like I just wanted to know, okay, I'm really interested in crystals. What's that like?
Is that where you are right now?
I don't know. Yeah, sort of. I'm just reading everything and anything. Yeah. So I've enjoyed reading about Wicca because I felt that the emphasis on the goddess is just such a missing aspect. And I noticed, like personally, as I was switching up my prayer, instead of saying "Dear Heavenly Father," which I've always started my prayers just from habit.
It's so hard to get out of that habit.
I
You
feel
say, dear
one
Heavenly
way.
Mother.
I just tried saying "Dear Heavenly Mother," and it was weird. It was like it sat differently in my heart space, and it was just like, oh. Yeah, and it was. This is a tangent, but it just has reminded me of our dear friend who also just kind of surprised me. I was talking about something in my life that was kind of a coincidence, and she said, "Well, God sure does know what she's doing, doesn't she?"
Love that.
The first time I ever considered that, and it completely threw me up.
Yeah.
I was like, "Wait, what?"
Yeah.
And so I appreciate that.
That's the leader of my church right now. Who she's talking about.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And then, and also with the Wicca thing, I just like how you are called to be personally involved in it. Like you have to bring your intention. You have to know what your questions are, what you're intending to bring to whatever the ritual is, or the whatever. Whether you're just holding a crystal for something, or it's setting out an herb to symbolize something, some intention. That's reaching in here and asking what is it that I want to bring forth into this world with God. It's like this co-creation together with the divine that I just that I appreciated.
Yeah, and I like that aspect too, because one of the things I liked about Catholicism was the ritual was very cool, but the distinction there is that there's a separation. The priests get to have all the fun. They're the ones doing all the ritual, and you just sit there in the pews and just kind of watch it. Whereas in I guess more mystical traditions, you get to actually be a part of the magic. You get to be a part of the intention. You get to have that communion, like you're talking about, which is what I think what attracted me to Wicca.
Yeah.
And that's also kind of what I liked about a lot of the New Age stuff. But I went off. Like I started studying stuff like astral projection. I was remote viewing. Looking at people who were able to communicate via dream. Like I was like, I want to know all about this weird stuff that's on the periphery.
He introduced me to that, and it blew my mind. He's like, this is how you do this. I was like, I'm sorry, what? You can do that? And he's like, yeah, I'm getting good at it. And I was like, oh my God, that's so
Yeah,
cool.
I'm not as good at it now as I used to be when I was younger.
Like
Yeah.
astral projection or what?
We had more time on our hands.
Yeah, and like I know this is going to be a stretch for some people, but like after, you know, let me get to where I am now, and then I'll
Okay.
because I feel like
Yes.
you're getting
Yeah.
so like I kind of was in a blank phase for a while through college, and then I went back into when I moved to New York and I kind of started my own life there. I started to kind of a couple years after that, I started kind of being like interested back into spirituality. So I didn't really do any of this stuff. I was kind of divorced from it. And I started like feeling well, you know what it was, is after college, I moved back here for a year and I wasn't well.
No, a couple
think-
years.
I was like, it was like a year and a half, 2 years.
You
right?
left in 2007.
And I wasn't feeling well.
No, we were both. It was
I
not.
don't know if
SDS,
it
we
was
used to say.
depression or what it was, but I was like nauseous all the time, really tired, and I definitely
Extreme exhaustion.
I was depressed. I was kind of not sure what my prospects were. I was kind of stuck here. And I just remember I started going to a naturopathic doctor. The doctor was like, do you like listen to music? Do you like meditation? And I said, no, I've always been interested in meditation, but I've never tried it. And I started meditating and, listening to kind of ambient music just to try to like relax me. And that's kind of when I started getting back into more mystical practices. I started meditating, I started doing yoga, I started, looking into, I think The Secret had come out then, which I jokingly call that the Diet Coke of occultism.
I mean,
Because it's basically the
we
gist
worshipped-
of Hermetics.
we
Is
worshipped
but-
that
when it
Paul
first-
Coelho? Is that what that is? The author of that, The Secret, or is that something different? I'm
No,
thinking of something else.
Paulo Coelho is The Alchemist, which is a really
Oh,
great
that's
book.
one, okay. Yeah.
Rhonda Byrne was the one who wrote The Secret,
Okay.
and she basically capitalized on.
dream boards, thoughts become things, setting
Yeah,
intentions.
So we have this rich history in the United States, come to find out,
What?
of the New Thought movement, which
Yeah.
really came out of the Nuremberg district in New York. A lot of spiritists were moving up and going on retreats and coming back and sort of forming like these new traditions. We get Mormonism from that movement. We have
Really?
Oh, really? I
Theosophy
didn't
comes
know
out of that movement. Yeah.
Wow.
Okay.
So a lot of these sort of like mystical traditions sort of like spread out of like that movement. And then, a lot of them came back, a lot of them are architects, and like they ended up building Midtown Manhattan, turn of the century. A lot of those,
That's
if
crazy.
you look at the architecture of, these, they call it ziggurat style of a lot of the skyscrapers in New York, they were occult by design. They, they had, they were using the temple design because they believed that particular design amplified certain energies. So if you look through Midtown Manhattan, you can literally go on an occult tour. There was an author by the name of Mitch Hedberg. He's Mitch is going to kill me. Mitch Horowitz.
Oh, that's right. I enjoy listening to
I
him.
love him. He's just such a
Very
sweetheart.
knowledgeable. You know him personally?
I don't know him personally, but he used to do a lot of talks at the Theosophy Society in New York City, which I've gone to many of.
Oh, have you?
And I know
That would be
many of my friends
fun.
know him, and I've seen him talk in person. He's such a sweetheart. I love his book Occult America, which talks all about this like New Thought movement. So I kind of explored a lot of the ideas that came out of that, and a lot of our modern occultism like that gets spread here really came out of that New Thought movement. And the idea of The Secret kind of borrows from that movement, borrows from Hermetics. So there's like the Hermeticism, they have certain laws that they believe like reality works in, but everything in Hermetics is the idea of mind. That our minds are connected to some sort of field that exists through how things manifest. And so it's the idea that your thoughts do become things, that if you are not careful and rein in how you think, then you will also sort of manifest garbage. I kind of have some moral apprehension to that idea because it sort of makes one think that then, bad things that happen to a life, well, then are we responsible for them?
Right.
And I don't really ascribe to that.
Yeah. This is a lot. There's a lot of different traditions here that we're kind of going
Listen,
through.
So that's kind of what happened
Yeah.
with me was I kind of went through
You're
a like
diving in. This is the same sort of stuff that I'm
Instacart.
reading about a lot as well. Hermeticism, Christian Hermeticism in particular.
love that stuff.
Yeah.
But then what ended up happening was I I went on a body painting job. So a friend of
What?
mine, I was working
so
in the
cool.
burlesque world. I was emceeing, doing
Oh,
stand-up
okay.
comedy, and I knew a friend of mine, and he was like, I have my painting tools and we have models, and the rap artist Wiz Khalifa is doing a release party, and I need another artist. I have another
Shut
guy
up.
already on retainer. Can you come and do some spray painting for these on these models? So I'm like, yeah, that sounds like fun. I'll get paid a couple $100
my
and
God,
like,
Spray
that's so-
painting on the models.
yeah,
Yeah, they use their
So we
brush
did
here.
animal
Oh
print.
my
We did
gosh.
animal print. Like we had these we had 3 or 4 girls come up into the attic of this like space that we were in. It was wild, and spray painted them like cheetah print, leopard print, all this stuff. And it was really fun. But I met this other friend of mine through that, and he was super cool, and he was like this other gay guy, and I was like, oh, this guy's like so cool. And we traded info, and we became friends on Facebook. So fast forward a year later, I'm really now reading heavily into the occult stuff. I'm like, okay, I want to know about this. I want to know about that. I'm reading about, Secret Teaching of All Ages by Manly P. Hall. I'm reading, like Theosophy,
You
Madame
made it through
Blavatsky.
that whole book.
No, but I have. It is an excellent book, but it is comprehensive. But then I read a book on what they call now chaos magic by Peter J. Carroll, this Libranon and Psychonaut, and I was like, this is cool because it's basically saying, okay, the chaos theory of science, which is basically saying that sure there are general laws of how the universe works, but everything manifests by randomness.
Okay, yes, okay, so I feel like I'm vaguely familiar with this idea, so, okay, expand a little bit more on that.
So,
So does that mean that you're like the thoughts become things and manifesting is not in your control in this?
sort
idea?
of. Well, it's hard to explain, but really, there's no such thing. So, as someone who has practiced for most of my career as a magician, the chaos theory of magic. I don't like calling it chaos magic because there's really no such thing as chaos magic. It's just a theory of how things manifest, how one manifests things. It's capitalizing on the idea that the universe is chaotic. More of like the original Greek idea of chaos, is that everything sort of manifests out of randomness and then falls into these patterns of order.
So not that it's mass chaos and that there's no order to be seen. It's the fact that there is a chance, and there's always a randomness and a chance
Exactly.
that then falls into patterns.
And so it's sort of like beyond the mask of what we see, the sort of like the stage of order that we live on is this seat underneath that is chaos. It's sort of like this randomness and just a lot of math that goes on it. But it's very science-based.
Have you read any of David Bohm's stuff on the implicate order? So that's the underlying fabric of reality is that there is innumerable possibilities that could exist, and then the explicit order is what actually becomes out of that. Is that kind of?
Yeah, so I know some now. I know a lot of people who practice the chaos theory of magic, and like not everyone agrees because it's such an ephemeral art form. But what I kind of see it as is this potential. It's limitless potential. It's saying, so okay, it's putting you in the communication with the universe at large and saying, okay, I'm a small facet of that. I'm a drop in the ocean, but I can still kind of jump into the ocean and instead of say, okay, now I'm going to try to weave things here and there. Some people call what I would do like results-based magic, which means like it's like the traditional get laid, get paid, get even. I actually don't really. I used to do a lot of that kind of stuff, not so much to get even stuff because it's not my thing, but and it does work. I've had a lot of success with it. And it stuck to me because I was like, oh, this is non-dogmatic, and there are mystical elements to it. It's basically saying, okay, here's science, but it's sort of like the mystical element of new science, and it kind of goes along with a lot of the other fun stuff I was doing, like remote viewing, other sort of psychic developments, meditation, and so I practiced that for a really long time. Well, come to find out, my friend who had did this body painting job, I started posting like I'm looking for more occult books, like particularly about this particular like style, and he's like, oh, me too. And then he was like, hey, I'm, work with a bunch of these other people who do kind of the same thing. And so I kind of got into like a community of people and I started meeting with a bunch of people. And so now fast forward, I've been doing this stuff for like 15 years.
And this is it. This is like, so you would call yourself a magician? Is this
A magician, because I don't really, you asked, like, I think in like the keynotes, like, do I ascribe to a certain tradition? I don't.
Okay.
I don't. I wouldn't consider myself a dogmatic magician. There's a lot of stuff online now about different types of witches or different types of magicians, because it's becoming more and more commercial.
Mhm.
So of course you have to categorize things like, are you a green witch, or are you an eclectic witch, or are you, a psychic witch? And I'm like, well, I'm all of that. It just depends on like what I need. And so some people too will ask me like, well, do you believe in gods or deities? And I will say, well, yes, but when I need one, I'll summon one. I also kind of have the view of a lot of Tantra as well, which is a tradition of Buddhism, which is very shamanic. And in that tradition, deities are not necessarily great. Gods, much like in stories of Greek myths, are jealous and petty and mean. And a
In
lot
Buddhism and Hinduism?
in Buddhism as well. Like there's the idea that there's a deity realm, like the Devas and the Asuras.
I thought they were all peaceful.
Well, no. I mean,
Okay.
Imagine you're born into a realm. The idea in their tradition is that you're born into a realm as a deity, and you have everything that you need, and so the only thing left you have to do is gossip with each other and petty intrigues and things like that. And so you just have one big long eternal soap opera. You're not going to be a very healthy person, I think, in that environment, but you might think everything's good.
Yeah.
So then comes in the Buddhist element, is that Buddhism has definitely informed a lot of how I view things. Obviously, you can also parallel that to the science that I was talking about too, is we have the idea that nothing is permanent, right? Entropy exists. Everything ages and decays. We will age and die. Everything around us eventually turns to dust. And so getting comfortable with that idea that like, things are not permanent are tenet of Buddhism.
Yeah.
Nothing really will satisfy you is another tenet of Buddhism. And that there's no self to be found. And by that meaning, like, we have an individual idea of us, but because we don't last, there's no such thing as a self, because a self would have to be eternally maintained.
What about your soul? Like,
Well,
what about?
I don't know that one exists.
Okay.
And in Buddhism,
So you don't
they
believe in reincarnation?
I don't know.
Oh,
I
okay.
suspect it might be possible. I know there's a lot of people, who are magicians who suspect, past lives are possible. They might be. I wouldn't be surprised if, I've been at this rodeo a couple different times before, because, like when I started getting into like magical and mysticism, I was like, this just feels like something like an old bike I picked up. Like, I used to say it all the time as a kid, like it just feels like I've done this before. So I suspect that it's possible. There's some evidence that reincarnation exists.
I believe it wholeheartedly.
I think it might be, but I think that I'm comfortable not knowing things. I am comfortable saying, like, I've tried things, I've gotten some results. I definitely have built up a little bit of evidence. I think Aleister Crowley said, like, as a magician, you try to use the methods of science, but with the aims of religion. So I'm trying to explain the universe and sort of how it works through mystical means, but I'm also using scientific methods. And I think a lot of people who do chaos theory of magic, you try to use a scientific method because you're trying to reproduce the results that you get.
Okay. And not just saying it's, okay, got it.
Well, this might sound like ignorant, but do you do like spells?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I mean, you say magician, and you use the term witch or shaman, whatever. So my natural thought process is like, okay, if he's doing rituals, he must be doing spells and things like that.
I think though, like I was talking about results-based magic, which would be like a spell to make a specific result.
That's what I was thinking about. Yeah.
I kind of turned away from that because I don't always think that that's the most responsible thing to do. I think that once you sort of get to the point where you realize, I'm not the only player here.
Right.
That you have to have a certain amount of ethics.
Because spells kind of feel like you're forcing something.
Yeah. That's,
And so now I'm kind of, I'm also looking at other traditions and things like that. And I am looking at kind of more traditional Western esoteric versions of occultism, like you would see in the Golden Dawn and Theosophy. And, I think that there's a lot of merit to having a tradition that has a lot of set rituals. And those are really about kind of in tune with your environment. And, I wouldn't do like a spell to make sure that I'm drive safe or to protect you, things like that. But I'm not gonna one of the things is I'm trying to change careers right now, and I've gone back and forth so many times. Like, should I really use magic to try to influence me getting a career? Because what are the questions I always have are, what are the implications of that?
Do you believe that
Yeah.
magic comes
Yeah.
with a price? Like that old saying?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Because I do think that every cause has an effect.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily, like, the thing that sucks about our universe, right, is that some people, as we know, are assholes, and they do shitty things to people, and nothing bad ever happens to them.
That we know,
But something bad happens to other people. And so I think that's sort of like what I mean by saying, like, I had to realize I'm not the only player here in this world. There are other people out there too, and that if I'm gonna do something, I have to make sure that it's not going to negatively affect somebody else or myself.
Right.
So the price, I guess, is sometimes we have the best of intentions, and the outcome is unfortunately harmful to somebody else
Because
too.
we don't have full knowledge. There's no way that we can know everything in our circumstances as humans right now. So with that limited, perspective, you got to realize that you need help, and that's why we're here together with other people. And you have to allow for the free will of other individuals, and that is love, right? So if you're trying to come from a place of love, you want to allow the most free will for all people. And as you gain more power, I would imagine, like if you're able to control things and feel like the more you have to balance it with also taking into consideration those with the less power, right? I feel like with
100%.
Power comes a lot of with great power comes
It's so true.
Right.
Like one of the things that like one of the spells that I did or rituals I worked on was about the balanced use of my voice. And by voice, I mean with a capital V, mean everything that I express and say to other people. That I bound myself to that so that I would have sort of like an ethic about how I communicate with people, because I found out that I do have a powerful I'm a very expressive person, and I've been an entertainer my whole life, so I can very easily influence other people, and I think that's the thing is that I'm also very easily suggestible too. I think that most people are very
because you're open.
well, that's the thing is that we take in a diet, right? And we want to be healthy with what we eat, but we forget that we are also what we read and what we watch, and the people that are around us. And we have to be careful about that diet too. And so I thought to myself, like, I have to be careful about what I say. Like, even on this podcast here, I'm trying to be responsible about how I talk about this stuff, because I wouldn't want somebody to get an idea and run with it and then hurt themselves. Because I absolutely believe you can blow yourself up with this stuff. I've seen it happen. I've been a part of it myself. It can happen. And you if you don't know what you're doing, you should. There's no dabbling as far as I'm concerned. Like there's safe practices to do. But even meditation, people don't often know this. Like you hear this a lot with people who are into like Buddhism, but if they meditate a lot, your mind and your brain actually does change, and things do happen, and sometimes you can be thrown. And so that's I think, just kind of going back to what I was saying before, there are a lot of people in my community who think that what I'm saying right now is bullshit, and that's fine. They don't believe that there's any sort of consequence, and they're they interpret, the chaos theory of magic as meaning that, they can do anything that they want. But I, just fall back on it. Well, just because you can do anything doesn't mean you necessarily should.
Yeah. So, so you now categorize yourself as a magician / shaman. So, would you?
I wouldn't call myself a shaman. Only because that just has a lot of cultural connotations that I wouldn't want to step on. The term shaman actually, they think comes from the Tungus tribes in Siberia. And there's a couple of different variations of what the word actually means. Like some people think it means like fence sitter, like someone who's like a hedge, someone who sits in between the spirit world and the other world. But the general idea of what a shamanic practice is using altered states of consciousness to achieve some goal or to traffic with spirits and to reach whatever tradition's other side. Every tradition has sort of like a mystical realm, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of what I do, I would categorize as shamanic in practice, but I wouldn't call myself a shaman.
Okay.
I would just say a magician, just because it's, I'm not part of any tradition. I would very much like to now be a part of a tradition and go all the way down to the core of it, because I think that there's a power in that. There's a power in being a part of a long-standing tradition that has through the years had a lot of, as you do more ritual over time, it does gain power and significance, and certain traditions mature over time. I don't have that. I would love to have a teacher right now because, me coming on this podcast, I'm not an expert.
None of us are.
I am not an expert. I've been practicing magic for about 20 years, but there's still tons of stuff that I don't know. And I'll probably be learning the rest of my life, and that's fine.
Do you think that if you were to find and decide on a faith tradition for even though it's in the magic realm, because you've been around so many other faith traditions, that if you decided to stick with one, that it would limit you in some ways? Obviously expand you in that
I think
field,
the thing about it is, like, if you're gonna commit to a tradition, you wanna honor and respect that tradition. Because I believe that belief is really the trump card here. It's sort of like
exactly.
we have an ability in our minds to coexist and co-create with whatever's going on around here, with varying levels of entities and all sorts of stuff. But if I'm going to commit to a tradition, I'd want to try. If there was some dogma, I try to respect that, because there might be a reason for why that practice exists. Right. So, like, I'll give you an example. Like, there's a really good school out there. Like, I would say, if anybody wants to get into magic and learn about the Western esoteric tradition, like the traditional Western occultism, I would look up the author Josephine McCarthy. One, she's a woman, which I think is a great new perspective, and she knows her stuff. Number two, but she and a few other magicians like Frater Acker, and I think Jan Fries is his name or their name. I'm not even sure to check it. But anyway, they have a school called Quarea, which is Latin, which just means the quarry. And I've started doing a couple of their modules, and it's just more traditional occultism, and it's very comprehensive, very complete. But going back to like your question, there is, they try to be a more modern school of magic. They don't really, they try to avoid the dogma, but there are certain things that, they tell you not to do, which some of it from my practices, I was like, well, I don't really know if I agree with that. I kind of feel like that might be some dogma of their own.
Like what? Like, give me,
I'm trying to think.
Like, for instance, I would say to anybody, don't ever touch a Ouija board. Don't ever fuck with that.
I would say go for it.
And I would say, unless I used to mess with, we used to mess with them.
Of course.
But I think one of the big things is like opening up portals that you don't know. So like the stuff that you're talking about can attract and open a lot of things.
Yes.
And I feel like in Christianity, we're very closed off to that. So it's not something we super worry about. I mean, they talk about the devil and stuff and demons, whatever. But the stuff that you talk about, I in my mind, I think, God, I would have to be so disciplined in this to know.
Yes, you do.
To even try, like you said, you can't dabble in it because it's not just, you're dealing with so many things here.
I have things that have happened to me all the time, like pesky little things that happen.
No, thank you.
Yeah, that people, like poltergeist activity.
You
like,
take all your spirits
Yeah, I know.
with you when you leave. They are going back in your car.
But sometimes it's usually when that sort of manifestation happens, it's usually entities or whatever you want to call them, spirits that are in your cohort that are trying to warn you of something.
I love that for us, but still, please don't show yourself to me. That's how I feel about
like,
them.
I had a situation once.
Send
where I had,
me the
I had
message in a dream.
a lot of times in a lot of magic traditions, salt is a
Yes.
protected element, right? And I had some bottles of salt and I put them in my spaces to just for protection, right? And I've had them, while I was doing the working, have them explode. And I had one.
Shut up.
Yeah, and one of my west wall just exploded while I was in the middle of the working, and I was like, okay, at least it happened to the bottle and not to me.
What
So
would
it took
cause
the
that? Do
hit.
you think? Do you know?
Well, your point in case, yes, doing this stuff does attract certain things, and a lot of it is just astral junk. Little critters and things are like, oh, because once you become, past the magic and you gain a certain amount of power in what you're doing, you're kind of like a flame on the astral field. And so every little thing is going to be like, oh, what's that? Like, let's go see what Evan's up to. And most of the time it's really just harmless.
That's what scares me.
But sometimes it's not. Like, I won't mince words. Like, people have died, for sure. And I know people that have died doing this stuff. So, when I read back through, like, going back to, like, the school, Poirot, right, and I'm reading through Josephine's stuff, I'm like, wow, she's such a strict mom. And I say that with such love. I adore Josephine. Like, she's so cool. But when I actually started doing the work and being more disciplined, I realized, oh, she's a strict mom because she's trying to keep me safe. And so it goes back to what I was talking about, like the rules that are in, what is it, Leviticus? I don't remember.
Leviticus.
You're my Bible reference.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm only like a little bit knowledgeable of the Bible. So
I know the stories, but I can't like cite things.
So again, I just go back to being like, this is put there to keep you safe. There's no hard, fast rules in magic, but there are general practices that you should do to keep yourself safe. So
guidelines.
Yes, what we call magical hygiene. I am a huge proponent of magical hygiene. So, doing things like, if you are going to be doing a working, I try to make sure that I am in a good mood. And am I in a good mental headspace? If I'm not, I might need to meditate for a while to center myself. So centering is a big part of that. Doing cleansing practices like maybe taking a shower, brushing your teeth before you do a ritual, like making sure my hands clean. Using Palo Santo as like a smudging that I like to use. I don't like the smell of sage, but Palo Santo is really effective. Incenses, using essential oils. There's a lot of different things that you can do to sort of like set up your space. And then, making sure that you know the ritual that you're going to do and that you declare what is, allowed to come into your space or not. My thing is, I don't really mind if anything or anyone wants to come into my space, but I am also prepared to, have a little bit of a chat with you if you try anything.
Okay.
Like, you want to come and sit with me and join me in my ritual? Great.
Have you ever had a bad experience where something attached to, other than the salt bottle exploding, but I mean like something attached to you where you're like, okay, I have to handle this?
Yeah, and I think that as I've gotten more adept at these practices, for me, your frame of mind is the best protection. So, I think paranoia and some other sort of things can come into play. So you sort of realize, whoa, this is sort of throwing me off. I've always had nightmares my whole life, and I think that's sort of an indication that something might be trying to disturb you. And then I just kind of try to pay it no mind, and I just do some, there's a term in occultism called it banishing, which I think is actually kind of mean, because if you believe that spirits exist, right, or entities exist beyond just this dense matter, right, they're a being too. They may not be human, but they're a person, right? And I like to respect them, and I kind of feel like, if I'm going to banish them and tell them, get out of here, well, maybe they live here. Maybe this is their home too. And so then I have to think like, okay, well maybe if this spirit in this house or location is causing me some trouble because it's maybe thinking that I'm taking over its space, and it's like, well, I have to talk to it and be like, I live here too. What do you need? What do we need to coexist? And that to me feels a lot healthier.
But I could kind of wonder why these, so esoteric is the term that we use for these sorts of things, meaning hidden. And it just makes me wonder if the reason why they've been hidden for so long is that us as humans in general just aren't quite in a place where we can, come back to the loving thing, act lovingly with that much power. And so these things sort of remain hidden behind a shroud of esoteric and exoteric rituals and religions. And maybe that's the reason for their existence. As I'm trying to work through why do we have all these religions that are just, they seem to be failing. They failed me on a lot of levels.
Because they're human.
They're human. So this is the ponderings that I've had. That maybe that's it. And I do see there's so many similarities in these core seeds of the different religions. And I think that there's a lot there and a lot of power that once you become aware of the power that you do have as a more than being a human, like your soul,
as a
your
spiritual being,
and
the responsibility that comes
with it. And I think that maybe, I don't know, I just hope that we start to get there as humans where we can appreciate and not just try to take power over everything, whether it's our environment, we just destroy our environment because we can, and we do things for convenience and for our own betterment.
We don't like to coexist.
Exactly. The ability to coexist with things. I just feel like if we could get there, then maybe we could move into some of these things naturally. Because I feel like there's just so much there, the ability to co-create, and how do you manifest in this world? I just feel like we have such more potential to have that influence. But I don't want to do it harmfully either. So,
I think a lot of traditions like what you're talking about do exist, but we treated them really poorly.
Yes.
Indigenous traditions,
yeah,
I think live a little bit. Those traditions, especially, looking back and learning about the history of this country, as an example, right? We are descended from colonists, right? And the biggest resource that this country had, we squandered, which was the native population here. We destroyed them. And as rich as this land is in natural resources, I think that the culture of the Native Americans was probably one of the richest resources, and we destroyed it.
I know, and that came because of the colonizers' view that they had the best way. And so I see that, and I try to look at myself, and I go, how can I go out in this world and realize that I don't necessarily always know the best way, and how can I be open to what other people are thinking and experiencing and seeing, and how can we all kind of move into that space, become more aware so that we can, see the benefits of somebody else's perspective. I mean, that's, I feel like when I say that, it sounds really trite, but
I think you're so right. And one of the things that what I liked about Josephine was that she tries to teach, magicians all different types of religions, because, you might need to work across the table at some point. Like maybe you need to do an exorcism with a priest. And if you kind of know your way around, you can kind of hop in with a priest and hang out. I had the opportunity once to join a priest in my neighborhood on an exorcism, and I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. He was a Jesuit, and I think the Jesuits are super cool.
Yeah.
I also kind of had a crush on him. But I was very professional, and we went to the same gym together, which is how we met. This Catholic Jesuit priest, and he saw my Buddhist pendant, and so we started talking about religion. And I was like, well, I actually practice magic. And he was like, what's that all about? And I was like, well, it's not much different than he actually, as a Jesuit, the Jesuits know their stuff.
They do, yeah. And they've always kind of been on the edge of things, right?
I suspect, I would not be surprised if they had their own sort of street tradition. Knowing from what I because the more his name's John, the more I talk to John, I'm like, we are not very different at all. You just wear a cassock and I don't. Anyway, I had the opportunity to go and watch him throw down. And I was like,
Can you please explain that? Because I would love to know.
well, you know, you take there's
Do you
certain
wanna
there's
know?
certain
Wait,
prayers
time out.
and incantations and
Time out.
yeah.
Here's the thing: is when I was going to the evangelical church, and the pastor would talk about like demons or whatever, and like their dark stuff, I would always be like, "Can you tell me about it?" And he's like,
Yeah,
"No."
it's
And he would say,
interesting
"No, we
stuff.
don't talk about that.
Yeah, we don't talk
We don't
about
talk about Bruno."
we don't talk about Bruno.
And this
Right.
this is why I enjoy having these kinds of conversations, because I have a deep rooted fear from that I really just
Yeah.
I don't think that it's legitimate, and I just want to get rid of my fear.
I have a
So
terrible fear
I want
of
to go back to
spiritual
what you
no,
were
really,
saying
I did
before,
too. Yeah.
because you and I will ADHD ourselves
I know.
off the table.
Exorcism.
I know.
Go there. Forget
But
everything
we'll
else.
get back to that.
Okay.
But like, I think it was the idea
Placeholder
of
for
like
the exorcism.
all of these traditions sort of forming grades and access to this stuff. I think that your assumption is correct. Yes, like even the Golden Dawn had, like, you're not supposed to perform certain magical acts until you get to a certain amount of grade. And it is because you absolutely can harm yourself and other people with doing it. So it is intended to keep you safe. But there are other traditions that like more sort of like public plebeian style magic, like chaos magic, is super popular right now. I think that there's an immaturity in that a lot of people who just pick up stuff from the internet and start practicing this magic, they don't really understand what they're doing. And like I still believe very much in the chaos theory of magic, but because of what you're talking about of keeping things safe and hygienic, and have had bad experiences myself, realize the importance maybe of some of these traditions and the reasons why they have restrictions on things. I am of the idea that it's a rule, it's a guideline, not a guardrail. That you can do anything that you need to do, but you just have to make sure that you are gonna, is driving dangerous? Absolutely. Can you die from it? Yes. So you need to learn the rules of the road so that you can drive safely. I think it's the same with a lot of these esoteric traditions. And then what you were talking about demons, I wanted to get into that. Josephine actually, I learned from her that the idea of a demon is a conditional entity, meaning that it is not necessarily infernal. It's just any entity that is conditional, meaning it can, if you meet its conditions, it's fine. Whereas an angel is like operational. It has a strict operation and it cannot deviate that from no matter what. So a lot of times in occultism, they say it's better sometimes maybe work with a demon than with an angel, because an angel will not be, you cannot compromise with an angel. You go back to the story of Job, right? Like wrestling with the angel. The angel has a one-track mind. It is an operational entity. It cannot deviate from that. And so if you, as a Job, try to deviate from that, it will fight you.
Yeah.
And they are powerful, and you will get messed up.
Well, and sometimes I wonder too. I'm just going to. I don't know if it's going to make sense, but like, I've read a lot of different stuff. One of the things was Eckhart Tolle.
Oh yeah.
And
Another Diet Coke of.
Yeah, exactly.
He's
Your
fine,
starter
but-
pack.
Yeah.
Exactly. But what really resonated with, well, a couple of things that really resonated with me was his description of the pain body. So his idea of the pain body is that, have you ever been in a situation where you maybe you have past traumatic events and then you all of a sudden get triggered, and like you feel like you cannot control the way that you react. You feel overwhelmed by emotion. You feel really, that's the pain body kind of taking over, and he almost comes close to calling it almost like another entity, and to me that made a lot of sense to me, that if there was a definition for things that were like demonic or the darker sides, that would be really what it would be something that comes from a place of pain, from a place of trauma that is trying to work itself out in a place of fear. And I don't know, and that to me, just understanding that made things a little bit like it's not just some evil thing out there just coming to get me.
I think those things are on different levels too.
Yeah.
Because I've heard
They
that
could be,
there's
yeah.
demons that were never people. This is just, whatever. They were demons that were never people, and they've always just been an evil entity. There's people that were in a tragedy, and then they're like, if we're talking hauntings and whatever, they're stuck in the negative space and they need help to cross over, whatever. But there's different levels too. So not to like put the fear back in there.
No, thanks.
But
Trying to justify.
well, no, but I think, especially coming from a Christian background, we go, oh, anything that's a spirit, or what they say is anything that's a spirit is evil, period. But it's like you said, there's things that happened to those spirits, some of them, probably most of them. I think demonic, right? Demons, like demons. Sorry, everybody.
Well, not all demons are bad. That's the thing, though. I think that like all demons get relegated to evil, where that's actually not, like, because like my understanding is, if you go back to like some of the Greco-Roman ideas of a demon or a daemon, is that it's just a spirit that has a different there's different categories of spirits. Some
daemon,
Daemon,
like Damon
where we
Heights.
Get our word demon.
Like Damon Heights, where you grew up on.
Oh.
Right. But the idea there is that these entities are naturally occurring in the land, but we do we live in a universe of predation, and I think that's
What is that?
like predatory,
Oh.
where bugs eat plants, and then animals eat the bugs, and then other animals eat those animals, and so there are certain entities that will love to feed off of your fear and your anxiety, which is why part of like the whole psychic self-protection is to make sure that you keep your mind in a good space. So like if you fear yourself feeling afraid,
You're more vulnerable.
but you can also override that and be like, I'm good. And sometimes just that act of being like, I'm okay. And I have found, like you were saying, is like connecting to love. It's like, as cheesy as this sounds, like, listen, if a demon like is coming up to me, like, what is it you want? Maybe we can make a deal. Like maybe I can compromise with you, and get you what you need without harming anyone, and then you go in your merry way. And usually, 9 times out of 10, I've had very little dealings with anything that I would consider like what we would classically call in modern eras like evil demon. Never really dealt with that so much.
So
I've dealt with some trouble, like pesky spirits that are obnoxious and break things. I had one happen just before I left here. I went to leave New York City, and Steven, my roommate, closed the door behind me, forgot something, came back in, the door wouldn't open. It was like immediately, it was just like, nope.
And he didn't.
And the door worked fine before. No, the mechanism of the door is now jammed shut. Like we had to come a locksmith to come and because if you took the handles off, the threading is fine. It's a brand new machine. Like we put a brand new machine on that thing.
Oh, it's electronic.
No, it's not. It's just a mechanical like.
Okay.
But it's stuck for whatever, and it happens. But it's like we do in that apartment in that area. It's definitely there are some pesky entities, and they've done some annoying things. And it's just like this door was working fine, and it's brand new. Like there was nothing wrong with it. We've been using it for 2 years, and all of a sudden, as soon as he shuts it in that one instant, it just didn't work. And I was thinking to myself, I was like, I don't know for sure, but I'm like, that seems like a little bit of a mischievous thing. I was like, I have to go now, and I will deal with you when I go back. But it's sometimes it's kind of like I joke and I just say I just try to have mom energy and be like, I'm sleeping right now. Can we not have this conversation in the middle of the night? Like, can we talk about this in the morning after I've had coffee, and I can dedicate some time to talking about what you need, because obviously you're trying to get my attention. Or like, can you not try to burn the house down? Like, we are living here and we need this house for shelter. You might not need it but like, can you just not take your fire outside?
What do you find that they want?
Most of the time, to as cheesy as it sounds, I think most of the time they just are lonely.
No, that's not cheesy. I've heard that a lot. Boy, that makes sense. So, last month, I went and had a Reiki session, which I told you both about, and was supposed to be the last podcast, but I accidentally let the file expire, and it is lost in time. So I did meet with a wonderful shaman up the street, and she was like, wow, you're really, really open. I said, yeah, well, I'm a little nervous because now that I'm open, I'm afraid of what can come in. how do I protect myself? That was my first question. And she was like, well, this is going to sound kind of silly and really too simple. You speak. I'm protected. I need you to go, or, whatever. So,
Yeah, in the present tense.
yes,
Yeah.
a couple nights ago, and I have my night nurse too pretty often, especially if I'm stressed.
Sure.
But in the last 6 months, I had a couple instances where I was like, you're in that twilight, and so I always have a light on in my room, even when I sleep. I cannot sleep with lights off completely. I need a nightlight. Yes, I'm almost 40. I'm not ashamed of it. I need the nightlight. So there are times where I'm sleeping, and I think that I'm in that twilight where I can still kind of hear the fan going, and I would open my eyes and think something was a figure was standing there, and I'm telling you, the fear, but it's gone in a split second. It's nothing that I've ever seen stay. So I'm like, oh, I must be dreaming. It happened to me a couple times. And I thought, wow, this has never happened to me before. What is this? Is this sleep paralysis? Whatever. Well, a couple nights ago, and now, fast forward, I've met with a shaman. She's told me what to do and whatever. And I'm in that same sort of twilight, and I feel my blankets being pulled off.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm panicking. I'm oh my God, it's happening. Okay, they know that I know that they're here now, and they know that my consciousness is open, and they've showed up to talk, and I'm not here. I don't want to talk. I'm so glad you're here. Great to know that I'm not alone, but I'm not ready for conversations. So in the dream, I'm going, I am protected. I have the blood of Jesus. I have a white light over me. I'm saying this in the dream, and the blanket is still being pulled, and now it's being pulled more aggressively. And I look down, and especially for vivid dreamers like us, you have to look for inconsistencies, right, to know if you're dreaming or not, because I couldn't tell. I looked down, the blanket is a white down comforter. I have a yellow quilt. So I'm oh my God, I'm in a dream. And it's getting more aggressive, and I started panicking a little bit. And I'm, in my rational mind, because I'm now aware that I'm dreaming, and I'm trapped in a dream that's freaking me out. So I start in the dream calling out to my mom, who is across the hall. And I don't know how long it took, but at one point she came in and shook my feet. And she's like, you're yelling for me. And I was like, I'm sorry, I had a bad dream. But I haven't pushed myself out of a dream like that in that much stress in a really long time. So I was it made me wonder, are these really things that are happening, or is it just part of, the stress dream? Is it,
Well, my opinion on that
who
is
knows?
that I think that it's a mistake that we think that just because something is a dream it isn't real.
Well, and I get that, because that's why.
Because you're still experiencing it.
Right.
It's still causing you stress.
Yeah, but everything else was exactly the same, and I do believe I've been visited by my grandmother in my dreams and stuff. So, I mean, I'm wondering if they're trying. Part of me was and you feel when you start to go through these opening your consciousness moments, you feel like a crazy person. You're okay, is this really happening? So I woke up and I thought to myself, are they really trying to make a connection, or is this just me dreaming about a fear of connecting? Or, you know what I mean? So, or is it really, now that I know that they're here, and they know that I know they're here, are they starting to show up in littler ways, which would make sense to start with a dream. It wasn't super aggressive. It was just but I knew that something was happening. And I felt more connected to spirit in the last year after leaving the last church that I was at, because the new church I'm at now gives a lot more free range and permission to go through that and be connected to the earth and be connected to yourself and be connected to spirit, which I didn't have
Sounds
that.
a lot healthier.
It's way healthier, yeah, but they still have their problems too.
Sure.
So
I mean, listen, every magic community I've ever been in has its issues too. That's the thing, is that all the people that are doing this stuff, they're all very human. So you're gonna have human problems everywhere you go.
I can't get rid of that.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, we need another flood.
No, we don't.
I'm trying to control the population. I'm just saying.
I think we've done that job. We're
I know.
probably gonna do that job
I know.
just fine for ourselves, unfortunately.
Well, they did say that the next Armageddon is going to be fire, so maybe global warming will just scorch this planet right up, and then it can rebirth itself without us here.
I want to get back to
Sorry.
the questions I was going to
Yes,
ask.
please.
Sure.
I want to get back to the exorcism.
I know, well, we can go there if you would like.
While you look for that, can he tell us about his
Yeah, go
exorcism?
for
Yeah, so Father John.
Wait, is this going to freak you out?
It's okay. I'm okay with it.
Okay.
I'll let you know.
You're protected.
You're protected. We're all fine here. So there was a parent, so I know this guy from my gym, right? Father John. He's a Catholic priest. He's a Jesuit. Super cool. He's Greek. So he speaks Greek and English because my neighborhood is like Greek Orthodox. But there's very superstitious community in the Greek and Italians that live in that area. So apparently he was like, oh yeah, there's this one house that has a lot of like activity happening in the house, and there might be some like malefic spirits. And so I was like, tell me more, because I kind of like love all that stuff. Like part of the appeal is just like when anything like that happens, I'm like, okay, like part of me wants to touch the fire a little bit. I'm a little bit intrigued. So it was like, yeah, I was like, oh, okay, wow, cool. Like I was like, I've done a lot of like clearings and things like that of dealing with pesky stuff that might come up and protection and whatnot. Can I come with you? It's like, can I? Would you be okay with me being there? And I've never seen a traditional like Catholic exorcism. I would love to see it. And he said, yeah, sure. He said, you can help out. So he let me hold the holy water, and then like he had incense, and he had a bunch of different incantations and prayers that he did, and like
Was the person all wigged out? Were they like?
I don't know. So it was an older Greek woman, and I didn't really understand what she was saying because she didn't speak English all that much. But it was interesting because there were like manifestations happening in the house. Like when we went in, like the lights were flickering, and like apparently the electrician had checked, and like there's nothing wrong with the wiring. That they couldn't figure out what the problem was, but there was like flickering going on. And then there were definitely like cabinets and things like that, like opening and like slamming, or like a bulb fell down and smashed over there. And I was like, okay. So back to what you were saying before too. It's like some of the times of the best defense, I think, is having a sense of humor in situations like that. And like this guy comes in, he's just like super confident. He knows what he's doing. He walked through all of the steps of the
yeah, you can't have fear in these situations.
No, and he just was like, oh, and then he like a crap joke on the side. He's like, this will take 5 minutes. And I was like, oh, yeah. I was like, that level of confidence is very attractive. But anyway,
Evan, this is not you dating during the exorcism.
I know. It was like this is not like a pickup, like
Oh my god.
love
We
connection.
met at an exorcism.
That would happen to me.
Yeah, it was.
But,
Totally.
No. So I was just kind of fascinated. Again, it was like, here's someone who is really trained, obviously, in their tradition.
Yeah, he's super
Knows their
comfortable.
stuff.
Mhm.
Really comfortable, cracking jokes on the side. Like this woman is over here like freaking out, and I'm just like, wow, this is the coolest thing ever. And then after about 10 to 15 minutes, everything calmed down. Like it was like a silence came over the whole space, and he was like, all right, it's done. And he was like, yeah, but it might come back. So here's what we need to do. And he gave her some instructions, and like he did something which was like very magical. It was they gave her like a little like Greek labyrinth, because apparently troubled spirits sort of like get caught into the labyrinth because they're like little magpies, and they're like, ooh, this is cool and this is fun, and they'll get trapped in there. There's a lot of stuff that I've heard of too in traditional witchcraft, where they have like like witch bottles, where you like a spirit bottle where you it's designed so that the spirit can go into it, and then you can like take it outside or
We practiced with labyrinths too. We like our church has one at McCook's now.
For meditation purposes.
Yeah.
Not to trap evil
Yeah.
spirits,
but like really, from him, I kind of was interesting because he was like, well, I don't really, someone who was a very religious was like, I don't really think this is an evil spirit. And he was the one that really was like, I think it just needed some attention. Like and he was like, what I think he didn't tell the woman this, but he was kind of like, he did something I thought was actually very like not advanced, what I'm looking for, kind of more evolved. It was like I kind of told it, like if you needed more conversation, that to come to me and leave her alone, and I'll talk to this.
So would you feel like that was more of an exorcism, or he was just clearing the space of a poltergeist? Because exorcism, from what I understand, is like when something attaches and inhabits inside you.
Not necessarily. Exorcism isn't necessarily possession. Exorcism just means to like, it's a banishing.
Okay.
It's to move something out. It could be from someone who is possessed, but from speaking of possession, if you want to learn a great self-defense mechanism, it comes from the late great Carrie Fisher, actress, who always said, "There's no room for demons when you're self-possessed."
Okay.
So it's again going back to like, if you're set in yourself and you're in the right mental headspace, it's really, really hard for something to get in there.
Right.
And a lot of that comes from like, it's like the whole myth of the vampire. Like, it doesn't come in unless you invite it in.
Yeah.
So, oftentimes from what I hear of possession, it's often because someone was doing something stupid.
Mm-hmm.
Or, there are people out there who are petty and, magic practitioners that, exact revenge, and those people shouldn't be practicing magic, but
Would you consider that dark magic?
I don't really consider magic. So there's this whole thing in magic of like the left-hand path, the right-hand path.
Mm.
I think it's kind of bullshit. I don't really think that there's such thing as like dark or light anything. It's all about, how you're using it. Because again, I said like, you might be trying to help someone and then you end up hurting them.
Right.
Is that really
I
dark
see what you're
magic?
saying.
No. Or you might be trying to hurt someone, but then you end up actually doing them a favor.
Mm.
So it really goes back to intention for me.
Yeah.
I don't really think anything's off the table, but I'm just not really. The other thing I want to say about this is kind of goes into the dynamics of it, and then I'm going to let you ask more questions.
Mm-hmm.
I will go on tangents. There's a great Buddhist saying, I know you've heard of it before, it's like, holding on, being angry at someone is like, holding a hot coal in your hand. It doesn't actually burn the other person, it just really burns you.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're cursing someone or you're doing malefic magic against another person, you're actually creating a tie between you and that other person. And like, if you don't like that person, the best thing you should be doing is just forgetting about them. They don't even exist.
Yeah.
Banish them from your thoughts, because if you keep thinking about them with anger, then you're still being affected by it too. And so I always feel like a curse or a magical attack, it goes both ways.
Right.
You're hurting yourself just as much as you're hurting the other person. So I just think that it's not a very evolved way of doing things. A lot of people, they don't agree with me on that, but I'm like, okay, fuck around and find out.
Yeah, right. That's on their own self-hurt.
Yep.
Interesting. Yeah, the left-hand path versus the right-hand path just seems like it's another way that like dualism is thrown into something, trying to, make it seem like there are differences, and it's all kind of the spectrum of something. So, yeah.
What do you got on your list there, Faith?
Well, let's see. Okay, so about spiritual experiences. I wanted to discuss the non-rational state as an entrance into spiritual experiences. And have you had any spiritual experiences that you can share? Like the spiritual experiences, I would say, let's just say to define it as where you felt like you have communed with something greater than yourself and come into that kind of a broader awareness of.
Yeah, I've been having those more recently. I would say, would you consider like a spiritual experience where I feel like a greater connection to the whole? I have been doing a lot of sort of freeform meditation, and I do a lot of cloud gazing, where it's a Buddhist tradition where you sort of meditate on the ephemeralness of the clouds, and you sit and I have a garden. I'm very lucky that I live in Queens and I have a garden. And you just sit, and I sometimes will sit by my altar, sit on my meditation pillow, and stare out the window and just sort of let my mind wander a little bit, but also sort of try to get to a nice relaxed state.
Mm-hmm.
And even this last week, I had a couple experiences like I felt a state of, I guess, what you would call bliss. So I was like, oh, this feels so nice. I'm slowing down. I'm thinking or worrying about
Peace.
anything, and I'm just
Mhm.
connected to what I'm seeing, connected to what I'm smelling, and what I'm feeling, and I felt safe.
Uh-huh.
Which I think a lot of anxiety is, like when you live with
Mhm.
anxiety, you just don't feel safe. And I felt a sense of safety that I hadn't really felt in a while. I've been feeling that more and more the more that I do these sits, and it does feel like, I know that your next question is going to be about the divine. I don't really know what that is, but whatever it is, I don't feel separate from it.
You feel part of it
The
in
more-
some way.
Yeah. What do you mean by the non-rational state?
Yeah. So it's in some way like unleashing from logic, like the cause and
the
effect,
motives.
like this much, this causes this and that, and so kind of unleashing from that, and then whatever that is.
That is
and
my
then-
beat. That is really to me where magic happens.
Yeah.
So,
But yet still when you're casting a spell or whatever, there's very logical steps to it. So where does that fit into?
great question. So a lot of what you do in, like, if you're making a sigil, for instance, which is very like chaos theory of magic.
So a sigil, just explain what a sigil is.
So a sigil is a magical symbol that is it's an abstraction. God, I hope I explained this right. It's an abstraction of your intention in visual form. It could be like a symbol that you draw of a statement of intent. It could be, you would probably be great at making like pictorial
I
sigils.
bet you would, yeah.
You probably because it's very visual, it's very artistic. Like you can, like that painting up there that you did,
I bet
beautiful
that
painting,
has some.
that could be a sigil. If
Mhm.
you encoded it with your intention, you can make anything into a sigil.
Which I bet you do just naturally and in part.
Yeah, I
being
think
an
there's a lot of
artist.
magical intention in artists.
In artists. Oh yeah,
Yeah, for sure.
absolutely. Which
Evan
another
is
we can
also-
talk about.
Oh,
is also
for
an
sure.
artist.
Yeah,
Yes.
the creative thing.
Absolutely. And I think that the rational planning of that is important. So the logistics, you got to get that done first. But then the launching of that into like the aether requires the non-rational state, the auto-suggestion. So you're burying that intention by making it an abstract symbol because you want it to go into the subconscious mind. So a lot of sigil and chaos magic requires that auto-suggestion into the subconscious, and to do that, you need to sort of get rid of all of the logical thinking and go into that non-rational state of being so that it
Okay.
gets lodged in its subconscious, and then you kind of puts you into a frequency where these
Interesting.
synchronicities can happen.
So non-logic, that frame of mind is actually an entrance way or a portal into the subconscious.
It can be.
It can be, and then that would lead me to wonder, like, what is the subconscious? Then is that like our funnel up into entrance into the divine? Like,
I
is
think
that
so.
kinda like
I
I'm
think
like
so.
seeing this funnel
I
going
suspect,
upwards.
like
and
again, I don't want to say any hard, I know this stuff, but
we
I think
can't know for sure, right? But
no, but I think that one of the things that I love about Tantric Buddhism is that they explain a lot of this stuff in such great detail, but a lot of Western esotericism doesn't really explain or is not as easily accessible.
okay.
So they kind of see this kind of stuff like this non-rational state as that there are different levels or vibrations of reality, and that we see this dense version of it, but there are much subtler versions of it. And we have a dense body, but we also have a subtle body. It's that etheric body, and part of the pain body exists within that as well. The subconscious body, or Jung calls it the shadow, right?
Yeah.
It's that the part of the mind that you're not consciously aware of.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I do think that a lot of that can connect to the greater drops in the ocean.
And then, speaking of Jung also talks of the collective unconscious as
Mhm.
well. So if it is this, if I it's kind of like a funnel going outwards, and we're here at like the neck of it, and then up a little further is like this is the collective unconscious, and then if we move out further, it could be like whatever that is beyond that, where it becomes all one. I don't know. It's just kind of interesting.
Yeah, and
It's getting bigger and bigger.
I guess that's what it is that you would call divine, and so I'm not opposed to sort of using the terminology divine.
But you don't think the divine is necessarily like a person with a personality and character traits, and
I don't think that it actually is a thinking being at all.
You feel it's more of a,
Energy.
I think thinking and having a personality is what happens when you have a mortal experience. I think that but who can say? Like, that's the thing, is like, I can't speak with any sort of like authority on it because I have no idea. All I know is my own personal experience.
yeah, but you've had a lot of good experience and
Yeah.
you've read a lot, so it's always
Mhm.
good to talk with people like you about what you feel like you're.
But,
Yeah.
having these mystical experiences, right, where I'm
Mhm.
sitting and I'm sort of experiencing more of that, I do kind of feel like I in a conscious state, am getting a closer connection to that
Mhm.
other part, that other
Yeah.
half, where it can be really scary to some people.
I
It can be very
honestly-
unhinging.
I feel like
Really?
that's happening. I feel like for me recently, not with just the shaman, but like I was taught how to talk to trees and stuff. And at first I thought that was kind of dumb, but then I'm doing it and I'm like, when I walk the dog now, it's like a different experience.
You don't feel as alone.
Not just that, but the connected, like just when I walk on the grass, I feel sometimes kind of bad, like, oh, I'm killing this, or if I pull a weed,
I
Yeah.
get like that as well.
like I don't want to hurt it. Like I feel like I'm part of it, and one thing I really love about where I am right now is like we did do a lot of teachings on Indigenous people
That's awesome.
at my church.
That's great.
So I've learned a lot from them, and just learning about how they connect to their oneness and how they just weave in nature to their experience. Like it does make you think differently, and stuff that you never thought about before comes into your consciousness, and So me talking to a tree felt stupid, but then it started feeling freaky.
But yeah, so I feel like so what I'm sensing, like you're starting to open up.
Yeah,
But you're like,
but
what-
it is scary.
but yeah, so like it's like at some point this interaction with the divine that we in Christianity we call it belief or faith, but in your faith in God, where you have to have this like there has to be like this element of trust too, and the divine is ultimate trustable, right? But it's so hard for us to open up and to trust.
But we also were taught, like, here's God, here's us. And now, like,
Yeah,
a lot
there's
of what
the
you're talking
duality.
about, a lot of what you're talking about is we're all together, like, we're partners. We're all on the same level.
I don't know about the same level,
Not
but,
same
but
level,
like
but,
I
like,
think
we're-
that it's like
It's not hierarchical.
Yeah,
I feel,
yeah.
but
yeah, it just depends.
It's hard to
It's more
explain.
situational, but yeah, I like the Buddhist model where they often say that you're a drop that came from the ocean, and when you go back into the ocean, you don't stop being the drop, but then you sort of dissolve into the ocean. So it's sort of
Right.
like we're seeing yourself more as a like non-dual, like
Right.
brings about a different set of awareness.
Yeah.
But like one of the things I kind of love from alchemy is that in alchemy there's the idea of like different levels of consciousness. Like there's different worlds. Like you have the plant consciousness, you have mineral or rock consciousness, and so the idea is that no, those things are not human, but they are consciousness. They are like, and so what
There's some kind of
transformed my
entity.
thinking was like, okay, so that's a tree out there. No, it is not human, but it is a person, and so it kind of changes how I want to. I don't want to just disrespect that.
wouldn't that just be a beneficial mind shift for everybody to take though?
Yeah.
If we could start to see like
Would
be more
change everything.
animistic
Yeah.
I can't say the word.
Animalistic?
No, not animalistic. Animistic, like you believe like in the spiritual existence of like the table has some sort of
Oh.
consciousness on
For
some
some-
level.
yeah.
Yeah,
You
it's not the
or-
same as us, but
Right,
it's different than this phone.
personification,
Like
yeah.
our
Right.
phone has an interesting consciousness too. It has machine functions and AI, and then it does amazing things, right?
Right.
Brian Froud.
Even his background is like mystical. Actually, I love that artist.
Yeah, he's great. So yeah.
So yeah.
Got distracted by the photo and I'm like, wow. that's
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I don't know. It's the nature of the divine. That's an interesting question that I keep coming back to because I grew up with believing in this Father God, essentially this man up there, judging my deeds and me always having to be very aware of what I was doing and whether it was
Hyper
wrong.
aware. Yeah.
Yeah, hyper aware. Me and my therapist.
Yeah. Oh, good. We're all in therapy. That's
Yes, we support
good. Yeah, that's
therapy here.
another thing. It's like I can't tell people enough. This is like, going into this kind of stuff is cool and everything like that, but like the value of therapy.
Yeah,
It is really
Just-
good.
you gotta get right in your head,
Yeah.
Yeah, so just starting out with that mindset, and now questioning that, and moving all through those sorts of questions about it, and I really just feel now, all my questioning started, just to back up a little bit, with an understanding of what love really is, and that's why I feel like it's a big thing for me. It's not obligation or duty or doing the right things. It's full acceptance. It's absolute total acceptance. So if God is love, and I believe that God is, that's something that I believe. I don't think that total love can impose any kind of requirements upon another. And I feel like any sort of independent individual does that on some point, on some level. So the whole idea of God as energy, as this flow, as God is love, I feel like the actual essence of love is God. It's that beingness, it's that flow between individuals as we're being open and accepting, as we give of ourselves for somebody else or put somebody else above us. That flow of love, I feel like that is actually might be the actual, like, that's the divine. It's a quality of being that happens between two people, which is why, if the divine existed as one, and does still, had to come into manifest form in order to express itself.
That's
Love
beautiful.
in some way. And so, I don't know, I'm kind of toying with all of that. I feel like that fits well for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting too, is like how that it's similar in the elements of Buddhism that I really love is, while it doesn't believe in sort of like a divine spirit, it doesn't believe in like a God. The idea there that the ultimate realization is compassion, which is, I think, very similar to what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Whereas that, sure, we're all sort of in their belief, it's very much like the Gnostics, where we're kind of living in a prison. This reality is, disappointing and is not meant to give us any sort of fulfillment, right? But that the ultimate realization of that is that we are together experiencing that, and so then compassion becomes the end result of that, because it's like, well, if I am not having a great time, and I know that you're not having a great time, we can commiserate on that, and I can, if I can try to figure out ways to sort of divorce bits of my suffering or lessen it, then maybe I can also realize and recognize that that person acting in the way that they are or whatever is experiencing suffering as well. And so therefore I'm going to try to realize we're all in that. We're all experiencing that.
Yeah.
And so just sometimes that realization of that compassion for other people and things even changes the whole paradigm,
It does, and that would give a reason for evil, wouldn't it? A little bit. I mean,
Maybe.
if it exists to kind of catalyst, an experience of compassion between us.
I wonder about that too. It's one of the things that I ask myself too, is like, well, what's the point of suffering? Well,
To work as a catalyst.
maybe, but then I'm like, well, what a nasty ass teacher, right? That has to like make you suffer so that you learn something.
Yeah, but
I'm
have you
like, but there's something to be said about that.
Have you met humans? We learn real hard.
I mean, I have
You know?
a totally different outlook now on failure. Like I've definitely
yeah.
learned everything I've learned by fucking something up, or by
Right.
failing at something, or by going through suffering. So I'm not totally been, I'm thankful. Like that year, where we were not feeling well, and I go back on that, but I wouldn't take a year back for anything.
Yeah, we would try to go on hikes, and both of us would get like 10 minutes down the road, like, we need to stay. We were both like that. I remember we went apple picking one day, and we ended up just laying down in the orchard because we was just tired.
Still don't know what that was about.
I believe, for me, I've been battling exhaustion up until most recently, and it wasn't until I got my head right that it went away.
Isn't that an interesting
I think
thing?
it a lot
Because
had to do with depression and
that happened with me as well, where like once I moved to the city, like I still was dealing with that for several years, but it wasn't until really I started practicing magic and like doing, protections and things like that. So suspect here, a little suspicious, but maybe something that was happening to us was a little bit of the unseen world that was affecting
Honest
us.
to God, I swear to you, there was a point in my life where I was like convinced I had like a succubus or a
What is that?
it's like it's a spirit that leeches off your energy when you're in depression, and they feed off your sadness, which depletes you. Like I was looking up all sorts, like an energy vampire. I was looking up like all these things because I'm like, how is it that I do so much stuff and I'm so exhausted? But you're right, it didn't go away. Excuse me, until I started going to church. And even though I wasn't at the church I stayed at, it started my healing. Like my healing process did start at church, where I had the community and the family to fill that void until I was right enough in my head to go forward and go for my own goals, and then step. And through time, the exhaustion got less and less until I'm at the point now where I don't drop in my bed at night and just like my body just gives out. Like it doesn't do that, and it's done that most of my life because most of my life I've been depressed. But I wasn't sure if something was attached to me. When I went into the evangelical church, I asked them to cleanse me. Like I went on a women's retreat where you didn't have your phone for the whole weekend, and it was pretty cathartic. Like they did do rituals, and we did say affirmations like like to banish anything that was left over or attached to you from the years.
Yeah, and even your attachments to I think unhealthy people in your life too. And there's a cult practice like where you do cord cutting, where you sort of see your ties together mechanically.
With the candles,
disentangle.
the two candles with a cord tied together. I've seen that multiple times.
Yeah, but also you can do it more astrally, where you just imagine the energetic cord between you and this other person, just dismantling it.
And I wonder sometimes, sorry, I don't want to cut you
Yeah,
off.
no.
I wonder if these things that like we're talking about, like you're talking about, what's the name of that entity you're saying?
Succubus.
Yeah, like, and we're talking about like the cutting of cords in the astral realm, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So I just wonder how much. So not that these things aren't real things, but sometimes I just
define real.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So that's the thing. But again, it comes to the point where we try to define the unseen. We try to put words to the stuff that we can't see. And then it ends up coming out in a concept like this cord, cutting a cord, or this entity.
And maybe we're all talking about the same thing.
And
It's
it could be
symbol,
it could be multiple different things. We're experiencing the same thing. Could be depression. Same thing as
Right.
Well, it could be like it could be also parallel.
Right, that's true.
Like using the magic model, right? Did the succubus cause the depression, or did the depression bring the succubus?
Right.
Or are they the same thing? Don't know.
Don't know. Question.
But the interesting synchronicity here that I would point out now, as someone who knows a little bit more about magic than 15 years ago, was that is interesting that happened to us both at the same time, that we were in each other's company, and that there was similar things going on in our life. And so that's something that I would be like, I'm not going to rush to define it, but I definitely am going to put my thumb on it and go, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, how I handle that was like I said, I'm like, okay, I don't know if it's a succubus, I don't know if it's this, I don't know, but let's just cover all our bases.
Well,
you guys bless me, you give me a pill to get better, I'll have a salad this afternoon. You know what I'm saying? Like,
you use a holistic
whatever it takes
approach.
because I don't know.
The pill is for the gross body, like the dense body.
Right. Okay.
And you have your other spiritual practices like clearings and meditation for the subtler body. Like these are all things that are cross traditional.
At the time, though, I didn't know
Yeah.
what I was doing, so I was like, I'll just take a little this, little that, little whatever, just make sure somebody
Well,
cover
and
me.
this is another good benefit to being like, you've read so many different traditions,
Yeah.
to being well read and just exploring different ideas and ways of looking at the world, because I think we're all experiencing the same things.
Yeah.
And we've started to define and assign concepts to them differently, which is all helpful. But as soon as we start holding on to those things too tightly, then we can't see all the
Right.
other expressions and maybe other ways people have seen different aspects of that from a different angle that we're not getting yet. So
I agree. And
I just
Yeah.
find it fascinating, like the the different the definitions of different
Yeah, the verbiage,
entities or
and certain traditions do certain things better than others. And that's the thing is like, like I do think that they're trying to accomplish similar goals, but I don't think that every tradition is parallel in its efficacy. Some things just do things better. Like, and also I think it also like ties into your culture. Like I know some people who like I wouldn't be able to step into a voodoo tradition. I don't think that would be right for me, right? For many different reasons. But I know some people who are in like voodoo and voodoo traditions that and they know how to throw down. And some of the stuff they do, like laying roots and doing, working with some of their sigils and things like that, they did some great effects. It's really amazing to me. And for me, I think one of the most effective protection has been in Buddhism. Like all of the Buddhist tantric practices I've ever done, because it wasn't really until I started doing that I really felt completely healthy. And I went, well, how much of that is tethered into like my mental health? Because after years of sitting down and shutting up my brain for 30 minutes a day, 40 minutes a day, like it changed
so
me.
need to do that. That's just the one thing I keep coming back again and again.
Centering
I need
prayer.
to do centering prayers and sort of
That's-
meditation
Yep.
regularly, and I do a hit and miss.
I learned that
It's
recently.
true.
I've
Yeah.
only been doing it for, I don't know, 3 or 4 months. And I remember saying to the pastor, I'm like, I don't know if I can sit through this. Because it's an hour, but we start and we say our joys and concerns, and then she has a singing bowl, bang, whoa, 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 do a little bit of that. And then she kind of like, just kind of guides you in like, hey, let go of your attachments, let go of your, desire for this, that, and the other thing, and just welcome everything that comes. And for the first couple months, because I do it every Wednesday, first couple months I was like, hey, I sat still the whole time. And I was quiet. And she's like, great. But like, are you welcoming things? I'm like, I don't know what you mean. I sat still. Like I was happy with that.
Step one.
And then over time, I'd sit with her again and again and be like, okay, what am I supposed to be doing? And she's like, it's not about what you're supposed to be doing. I'm like, I can't just sit there. Can I daydream? And she's like, it's really about praying. And I'm like, so I can't daydream. She's like, well, you can daydream, but it's not the purpose of it. So it took me a long time to figure out what I was supposed to be doing. Because I want
there's
rules
so many
and
different
guidelines.
types
I
of
know.
meditation. One of the things that you're sort of like skirting on, talking about daydreaming, is there's a practice in Buddhism called insight meditation, where you are paying attention to sort of the thoughts that come up, some of the content that comes up. You're paying attention to, like the quality of the light in the room. I'm going to pay attention to how the floor feels, and you sort of do mental notations and all that. And what happens if you do that long enough is that you do get what they call insights, where you're like, oh, I hadn't thought of that way before, because you're allowing yourself to sort of open up a little bit and just observe things. It's very different though than
She's not telling me not to do
Right.
anything. She says welcome everything, but
there's also
let it move-
shamatha. They
let
call
it
that
move
shamatha,
through you.
where it's a little bit of it's a little different than insight meditation, where you want to just sit and try to empty the mind, try to like let go of things, try to relax the body, because they do two different things,
Right, yeah.
And they're both very beneficial in their own way. I think the benefit of why they often teach shamatha or calm abiding meditation first is because we're not practiced that.
Right, we're not ready to sit
shut
and
up. So you have to do that first, and so that develops concentration meditation, the ability to wrangle your consciousness into focus, and then maybe then they do what they call in Vipassana, where they do insight, because it's like before you start doing that stuff, you have to be really good at being able to focus and to be relaxed.
Well, I did notice in the last month or two, like the last month, pretty recent, and I told you this too. I was like, what I've noticed, even though I feel like I'm doing all the same things, I come home and instead of flopping down on the bed and turning the TV on, I'll just look outside and be like, it's like 7 o'clock, so it's still light out. I'm like, come on, Olivia, hook her up and I take the dog for a walk. I said I would have never done that before. So something's happening where I don't know if it's just the idea that I've relaxed myself for an hour and then I'm like, oh, okay. And then I go out and I smell the air and I feel the ground on my feet and I'm more aware of my surroundings.
I think the other thing too that's important too, like if we bring in the psychological model, is that you and I are introverts. Like I'm absolutely.
I'm sorry, what?
I love.
You're talking to Faith, right? You're talking to Faith?
Yeah.
Okay, because
You're not an introvert.
am I,
You're not an introvert.
I think you're an
I
introvert.
thought my whole life I was an introvert. Evan, if you tell me now,
Okay, well maybe something would change.
and maybe I'm an ambivert.
I'm definitely an ambivert. Like I love to chat, but I have my batteries. Like
Yes,
like
I mean-
I could do like a nice 3 people chat. Like this is nice.
Yeah.
Like like a party
Crowds.
which I have to go to later. I'm gonna well my folks are having people over, and so
Say how the game.
yeah, I'm gonna have to like kind of pace myself into that.
Yeah, you're
'cause-
gonna need like a timeout in between these sessions.
Well, I have a plan.
Oh,
So
good.
once the party's
That's half the
over,
battle.
people ring up. I'm gonna go take a walk in the woods.
Yeah,
And just
that's
kind of
cool.
calm down and chat with the forest for a little bit.
Well, I think we're all sensitive individuals. And
Yes.
I know I'm more
She's an
introverted.
HSP for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
And then you're an extroverted,
Ambivert.
But see, the funny
sensitive
thing
person. Maybe. I mean, I
No,
don't
no,
know.
no, I am. And this is the thing. And this is what it's hard to explain, especially to the people like Faith who just met me like in the last year.
Oh wow. Okay.
And I say to them, I know this is hard for you to understand, but I never was like this before. I was never an extrovert like this. I mean, the pastor walked up to me the other day and was like, hey, can you read this scripture today? Because she didn't have somebody. I was like, yeah, okay. And I just got up and did it. I would have never, ever done that years ago. I was the kid that was sitting in the class going, God, please don't call my name. Please don't call my name. I don't want to go to the front. I make speeches. I'm doing all sorts of stuff. I go up to people in church like, hi, I don't know you want to hang out this week. I'm trying to make friends.
Yeah.
So when I tell her like you don't understand, like I was not this person. I was like kept holed up and like because interacting with other people was too intense for me because I was so weighed down by my depression. I think that really was the culprit. Is that because now I have more confidence and I feel better about myself, it's easier for me to just be who I want to be, and who that turned out to be is an extroverted person. I can actually walk into situations that I never would have dreamed of before.
I don't have any. I do have some social anxiety. It just depends on the situation.
Yeah, I still have
because
a little.
I think a lot of that stems back to like feeling like I'm never quite sure if I meet somebody new if I'm gonna
Be safe.
with them
Mhm,
because
yeah.
like they're gonna be comfortable with the fact that I'm just like I'm an openly gay person and
Yeah.
I am comfortable with who I am, but it's still not comfortable if you're around other
Right.
people who for whatever reason they're not there. And that I feel like I worked a lot through that though through meditation practices and things. What I was going to say is I think that a lot of what happens is that once you deal with a lot of the anxieties that are going on, you sort of really understand why they're happening.
Yeah.
Then it's interesting to see like the natural person that comes out of that. Because for me, what I realize is that I really want to have more introverted time where I'm not looking at my phone, my computer's off, I'm not watching TV, I'm in nature, and I want to spend like a whole afternoon just for myself. I want to give that to myself, right?
Right.
So hard in our modern era to do
Yeah,
that.
super hard.
And I think just the path that I'm on, the spiritual stuff that I'm exploring requires that.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah, it does because you're using so much.
I have to say, because I have 2 boys, so one of them's an extrovert and talks to me all
And he's
like
little.
nonstop. He's adorable. But what I found was over COVID time, I ended up at the same time getting a job at a church, and I had 2 part-time jobs. So that was one of them. But I had a little office there that I was able to go in. My kids were doing school at home. My husband didn't have to go into work, so he was home with them. And so I was going into the office to do my work. And that was the first time I had been alone in like 10 years. Like,
That felt great.
alone. I can't tell you the amount of like just personal healing and like feeling joy. Like I didn't realize joy was really missing for me, but just like feeling that like overwhelming joy just kind of start to surface back, and that would come up, but that wouldn't come up until I was back home with my family, and then I would feel that overwhelming joy come back. But it was the quiet was having that quiet space really, I feel like, enabled that to come around for you. So, yeah, and I think that's a key to spiritual practice and key to some certain types of personalities too.
For sure.
What's
Like
funny
when
is
I-
I went to her house one day and the kids were out and she goes, okay, well, it's almost 2:00, whatever time you send them away. I go, what's happening? She goes, oh, they have to go in their room for 1 hour so that I can just decompress. And I was like, that
Yeah.
is such a healthy thing to do. She's like,
Mommy needs a
she's
long
like,
time. Yeah.
she goes, I need it.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not really an option. She goes, I've been doing it since when they stopped napping. I just kept they had a quiet time. And right to the dot, right to the minute, that little one was like, can I come back out now? Like, and he was ready to just be near us. Like,
Kids love routine. So
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
like,
and I was like, wow, that is the way to do it. That is so smart.
yeah,
That's great.
Yeah.
well.
That's a good form of self-care.
Well,
Yeah.
I had been in I just recently am single again. Like 6 months ago, I decided to end my
I'm gonna
relationship
step
with my
out for
partner.
1 sec.
Should we keep talking?
You can.
Oh, okay. But I realized, like I was going to work, being surrounded by tons of people every day, all the time, absorbing all of their energy. And then, I worked in a really chaotic environment. And then I would come home and I would share space with my partner and I would never have any like private time.
Yeah.
And, now my life is so different now because I have my own room and I work from home. And
Oh,
so
wow.
I get a
Yeah,
lot
that's a
more
big
time to
difference.
myself. And I realized I'm so much healthier and happier now because I am more introverted and I needed that private time. Now I can spend, an hour and meditate without having to feel like I'm going to be disrupted at any moment.
You can't meditate when you're like, always worried if somebody's gonna come in or gonna interrupt it. It's like impossible.
Yeah.
You gotta have absolute quiet.
My next space, whatever that is that I move into, I don't care how big it is, but I want to have a dedicated space that is just for that.
Oh, that'd be wonderful.
Like even if it's a little closet that you
Uh-huh.
just put like a pillow in and like little ambient light or whatever, just something.
Oh,
Yeah.
I had dreams. Like I feel like that would be such a wonderful family thing to have. Like for a family, if anybody like have one dedicated little tiny room that if anybody just needed some peace, you knew that when the door was shut, that person was alone to be with, quiet, whatever they need. It'd be a great way to help a kid that's coming unraveled be able to go and have their space to calm down.
Yeah.
Not as punishment, but as just calm down.
Decompress.
Yeah.
Or if you want to go in there and say prayers or whatever,
Yeah.
there's a space
Quiet,
for it.
sacred place for you to be alone. Yeah. But yeah, it's a great idea.
And I like the idea of dark corners or like dark little closets because I like, for me, if I'm going to have a mystical or spiritual experience, I don't want to be stimulated by, light and sound and all this other stuff. So sometimes I want to just have an environment where it's really dark and I can just have, 4 walls around me and just be,
Yeah.
be able to sit. But it's harder and harder to get that these days.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Now that you said that, I feel like I might shy away from that. I have to have windows wherever I am. So maybe my little space would have to have a little window in it or something.
Yeah,
But yeah.
For sure. I mean, my like altar Zen corner, I guess you call it, is in the corner of my room, and I have a huge window. And I have blackout curtains. I can close them if I want, but I also like to have moments where I'm sitting and staring outside. Like that's one of my favorite things to do.
Me too.
Is just
Totally.
because that's a form of meditation too.
Mhm.
It's just sitting and watching, best show on earth for me. Just watching the trees and birds.
That's what I can say I'm dedicated to every day is I start my day with just staring out the window and having an open blank page on my journal.
Oh,
Right.
That is
Right,
good.
if I do.
I
Sometimes I
usually-
write, sometimes I don't. But
I record my dreams in the morning too.
I do
with my
too. I
coffee.
try to. Actually, it's funny because when you guys are talking about your morning rituals, I do more of my rituals at night. It's like because I can't dedicate time in the morning, like I start the day.
You're a
running.
night owl.
yeah, I know.
Yeah.
You're
I'm not. I'm a day worshiper. So.
I'm a night owl, so like right before bed is like when all my feelings and thoughts come to a head, and that's when I write those novel papers.
Different. It's interesting too, biologically, what happens at night. Because some of my spiritual experiences, and sometimes I feel like more mystically inclined at different times. Like, and I want to do different things at different times. And the
Well,
reason
do you
for
believe
that-
in the witching hour?
It's my favorite hour.
Oh, not
Like,
mine. But okay.
Twilight. It's a beautiful time. It's
Yeah, visually.
Yeah.
I'm
It's like
talking,
that beautiful ambient gray light. It's sometimes it gets golden, nice and gold colored.
yeah, until your grandma shows up.
Well, Grace just saying hey.
Oh my God, Lorraine, stay out of it.
What I was going to talk about was
Sorry.
the chemicals that your brain
Mm,
releases.
yeah.
Like DMT, for instance, like which is a hallucinogen, but your body produces it naturally as you're starting to go to sleep, which is why you get hypnagogic imagery when
Yep.
you're falling asleep and your dreams are a product of all those chemicals. So I think it's interesting how a lot of spiritual experiences and traditions use nighttime as well when you're also using those biological processes.
Yeah, that is really cool. It's cool to notice, take note of the natural rhythms of things, whether it's the time of day or the time of year, the where the moon is. I mean,
There's-
I love
They call that
part.
orderary in magical traditions. It's called orderary magic, like magic by the hour. Or like you
Wow.
can. There's certain traditions have like meanings for like a certain time of day has a certain omen. So if like you see a certain like animal at a certain time, that has an orderary meaning.
Ooh.
Yeah, I mean, I have to be careful with myself because I get carried away into all of that
Yeah.
stuff, and
Yeah.
then I get lost in all the details and
Yeah,
forget
They're
the
just
gist of it.
details.
The gist of it is that we can jump in with some of those natural energies in different times of day or things, and just to make use of
Like the
them.
tides and the cycles of the moon. And, we know that those affect our body.
Yeah.
The thing is, like, I don't know whether or not astrology is total bullshit. It's fun, but you do think about like, well, these massive bodies are floating around in space, and there's all these gravitational and electromagnetic processes happening.
Yeah.
Who's to say that they don't have some effect on us in some
Oh,
way?
sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I just wish that science would dive more into that and explore these kinds of the spiritual.
They do. Well,
things.
here's the thing. I was wondering if that was going to come up. They do, but there is just like in a lot of other academic studies, and even in religious orders, there is a ivory tower that decides what is sacrosanct evidence and what isn't,
Yeah.
and that decides what is true and what isn't. And I think that's the biggest crime because you're cutting off. There's lots, like I think of the Robert Monroe program that the government did on remote viewing, where
Mhm.
they absolutely had effective people who had developed the skill of remote
Yeah.
viewing. It is absolutely, our minds are incredible, and they can. I do strongly believe that there are psychic abilities, right, and they can be trained. And the interesting thing was that the government released all the files on their remote viewing. Maybe had a movie about it, the Men Who Stare at
Yep.
Ghosts. And their conclusion was, yeah, humans can do this stuff, but we don't really know what use it is when we have telescopic cameras that can do that are even more effective. So what's the point of spending money on someone who could remote view for us when we can just get a drone to fly in with a microscope camera and take what we need and get out?
All
Well, the
controllable
other-
all the way.
Right.
Yeah.
The other thing of that is that people are now treating scientists like folklore. So even if the science is
Which
based on,
scares me a little
it's
bit.
terrifying.
Oh yeah.
I mean, when we think about global warming,
like
we
with
think about
pandemic.
the pandemic, but even it started with like the global warming where people are like, yeah, I just don't believe that. And it's like, I'm sorry, I didn't know that was an option.
Yeah, very much. That,
So
that was very strong in my.
Well, science
circle.
can be dogmatic though, too, and that's kind of fun.
Yeah.
It's like sometimes there are people who are scientists who I think are very rigid and dogmatic, and I think that I am not a fan of Dawkins. Like I think Dawkins' idea of atheism is just ridiculous because it has an agenda, and his viewpoint about atheism. I think I would consider myself in some ways an atheist because I don't really believe in an overarching thinking deity that dictates or controls me. However, I
but
don't.
you believe in source.
I
Sort of.
think I am
Right.
like I said, I
Yeah.
suspect that there's something else going on that we
But
just
how
don't
you
know.
define it is
And
tricky.
I'm just saying, okay, science. Then if the aims of science, right, or the methods of science, the aim of religion, science needs to do a better job. science to dig into the stuff because there is something to it. There are like large bodies of evidence, that are out there, but they cherry pick and choose what is honored and what isn't.
Yeah, and the thing is it's not intentional-ish. It's the dogmatic way of thinking. They're stuck in this very box-like way of thinking, and they're trying to affirm their propositions that they already have established instead of trying to expand.
And
So.
some of this phenomena that we're discussing is very fluid and ephemeral, and we don't really understand the behavior of it, and so it's hard to sort of measure it when we don't understand how it behaves. This is why it's called a cult. It's the hidden world. It exists sort of like beyond the corners of what we've been able to measure. But a lot of stuff though that we are starting to like. One of the things we were talking about earlier was the collective consciousness, right? Well, recently, within the last 5 years, they've discovered that consciousness actually consciousness is measurable, that it has a weight. And so now they're saying, it's like we only recognize things if they have some sort of material use, right? But now that they're saying that, consciousness might be an actual field. It might be some sort of like a liquid field that we just haven't been able to measure yet, but now they think that it's there. But also we're in a capitalist society, and I think that a lot of this stuff doesn't have any material benefit. And so if it doesn't have material benefit, then why would we want to study it?
Because it costs money to study everything, so
Right.
why would we waste our money on that? That's sad.
Yeah, well, that's a whole other issue. I wish we could take money out of the equation of everything.
Yeah, I mean, this is why
Star
like,
Trek.
some people
Right?
some people will charge money for like tarot or whatever. I don't really know how I feel about that. Like if somebody really has like if somebody were to ask me to like do an exorcism for them, I would not charge them money for that because I don't really know what's going on. Like that might be mental illness, and I don't want to touch that. Like a professional needs to handle that. But also like I just don't feel right. Like for me, it goes back to my ethics. Like, I don't feel right about that being sort of a capitalist material exchange. I think that's not healthy. Like that, I feel like I'd be taking advantage of somebody when they just need help. So that I wouldn't be okay with that. But like maybe if I were teaching somebody some stuff, like if I were going to have a lecture or whatever like that, that takes a lot of time and expertise for me to go out of my way. So I'm like, I might be okay with being like, hey, maybe I would start a Patreon or some sort of like fee to come to a lecture or class. But yeah, I don't know. That's another total concept about my magical community I'm part of. It's like that competition doesn't really have a period on the end of that sentence. It's like, do you charge money for this stuff or do you not? Like, why would you? Because we could talk about across the table with pastors and churches, these mega churches that are basically I'm as far as I'm concerned are just taking advantage
I
of
hate
people.
mega churches.
It's evil.
I especially after what happened when Texas flooded and Lakeview, Joel Osteen's church was like, oh, it can't open its doors, but this little rinky-dink mattress place next door was like ripping open all their mattresses so that people could lay down and stay there while there's this gigantic arena and there's schools across town in his multi-million-dollar house. How is that helping the kingdom of God?
Yeah.
There's no humility there. I don't understand those at all.
Just looking at the time.
I know you are. I've watched
Yeah,
it.
I mean, I
Yeah.
could talk about this.
Yeah, we have to stop you. We were on the phone for 3.5 hours the other night.
Yeah. I mean, I like this is if this
There's so much
could
to
be
it.
my job, and so if I could make a living out of this stuff, I would because it is like my true like I love this stuff.
Yeah.
Like, eat,
Well,
drink,
let me
sleep,
just say
breathe.
one thing on that, because having that Reiki experience where that shaman actually connected me to my grandmother's spirit, which I wasn't sure was a real thing and then became a real thing. I would hope that she would continue to do that. And the only reason she couldn't is if she had like another like real job. So I'm actually glad that she offers that service where her day is spent helping give message from spirit. So like I was happy to pay her money. I don't think it was an extravagant amount. Like if I wanted to go like see Teresa Caputo or something, her sessions are like she's,
so
I know.
nuts.
Well, I'm just saying, like, if you compare it, her sessions are like $250 to $300. Like, this one was like $100. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? That's fair. Because if I wanted to go get a facial or massage, it'd be about the same. So, I mean, I know that everybody's different, but like now she gets to do this where she stays connected to spirit all day, every day. She's giving messages. I can't center myself that way. So I'm happy to give her that money to be that connection to the other side. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I don't feel like she was like abusing it.
So you're saying that Evan should do the same. He should use his
I'm not-
skill.
I'm saying
very
it-
trepidatious about
I'm
that.
saying if you were to do that, I don't think you should feel bad about it. I know what you're saying. Like
It's
like
about. I would worry that I wouldn't want to take advantage.
it's hard for us to sell our art. The first thing I say to my mom is, how much should I put on this? How much should I? And she goes, well, whatever you think. And I'm like, I can't value my art. I don't know what people pay for it. So now I just don't sell my art. I make my art as gifts. And people go, oh, you should charge this much for that, or you should sell these. And I go, it's not the same. I don't put the same amount of love. I don't have the same amount of effort, and then it turns it into something I don't love anymore.
Yeah.
That's why I stopped doing pencil portraits.
I was going to say something beautiful I witnessed was I have a friend who has a sister has a mental illness, but she paints and she paints beautifully. And I helped her get a website up online. And I was what touched me the most was her pricing. Pricing of her
Very
images.
humble.
No, not necessarily.
Oh, okay.
It was. So they were all reasonably priced. But every single picture of her family member was like double, triple the cost of all the other ones. I was just like, I just loved that
That's
so much.
sweet.
Like you could just see what was most meaningful to
Yeah.
her and what she, because there just wasn't that like, I don't know. It's hard as an artist to charge
Yeah.
for your stuff.
It
for
is.
sure.
So that's Louis Vuitton, and his brother Teddy. Teddy's blind as hell. Okay, well, this has been a lot.
I know.
If you guys remember, we're still recording.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us. I couldn't even try to reference a third of what Evan had brought forth. So just rewind or message us or whatever, because I'd be here all day and all night citing
wild-
everything that he just
A
said.
wild ride through the Western esoteric
Yeah.
tradition from Christianity, Judaism, Christianity,
Yeah.
Western esoteric tradition to
It's a very
magician
American
slash-
story.
Yeah.
shaman.
It's a goulash.
It's a melting pot.
Yeah, it's a melting pot and goulash and stuff. So.
Yeah, yeah.
But thank you, Evan, for joining us
Yeah,
and
thank you.
sharing all of your crazy insights. Not crazy that way, you know what I mean? Crazy to us squares. And we hope that you'll join us on the next one. So thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye. And cut. It is so clammy and hot.